Hi everyone, I'm Ranger Lindsey at Haw River State Park. Today, with so much stuff in bloom, I thought it'd be a great opportunity to stop and smell the wildflowers. Let's go see what we can find. In the most basic definition, a flower is the reproductive structure of flowering plants, so they're all going to have the same basic parts. Here's a general diagram of a flower. You see it's got the petals. These are usually the colorful, showy part of the flower that kind of catches our eye. You've got the male part over here, which altogether is called the stamen, and the stamen is made up of a filament right here that supports the anther up top, and the anther is what produces the pollen, which is the male reproductive cell for the flower. So either on the same flower or on a completely different flower, you're going to have the female parts, which are called altogether the pistil. So up top of the pistil, you've got the stigma. This is sticky. This is where the pollen gets deposited if the flower is successfully pollinated. And then the pollen would travel down this long tube called a style and deposit here at the base called an ovary. Within the ovary, the pollen develops into a fruit containing seeds, and the seeds contain the genetic material of the plant. So if the seeds are successfully planted in the ground, it'll sprout and create a new plant with new flowers and start the process all over again. So guys, flowers can be found from the tiniest of ground plants and vines up to bushes and tall trees. They come in all different shapes and sizes with one goal in mind, to draw in a pollinator. And that way, each flower is kind of like a billboard, trying to draw in animals by using their shape, color, size, and scent to draw in a pollinator. Also, because flowers come in such a variety, you may not even know what you're looking at is a flower. Would you believe me if I told you this thing down here is a flower from an oak tree? If you pick it up, you can kind of rub it between your fingers if you're not super allergic to pollen. Let it fall. Look at all those granules. Here's some of those oak flowers again, but this time they are on the tree. So let's take a look. See? Here we've got a nice patch of bluets. They're a really tiny flower. Here's another type of bluet you might see in your yard. It's even tinier than the other one we looked at. These ones are actually called tiny bluets. Over here at the iron ore tract, we have a glorious example of our state flower growing on the flowering dogwood tree. So when you look at this, you think, wow, that is a pretty white flower. You'd actually be wrong. See that white part right there? Those aren't actually petals. Those are called bracts, which is a scientific word which in this case means modified leaves. Those little green and yellow things right there, those are the actual dogwood flowers. Here's a common understory tree we have at Haw River State Park, which I'm sure you've also seen from the roadsides. But this native deciduous tree is eastern redbud. It has some bright pink and light purple flowers that come out in early spring. This tree is also a member of the beans, peas, and legumes family, Fabaceae. So you'll see in the coming weeks as the fruits emerge, it kind of looks like a bean pod. So close up on those flowers. I just saw a zebra swallowtail butterfly go by. It was really cool, but so fast I couldn't get it on camera. But I did see this pretty flower. So this is green and gold. This flower flowers in early spring and may continue throughout the summer sporadically to bloom. But it does well in sun to partial shade, which probably explains why I'm finding it so close to the trail. Here's a nice little patch of spring beauties. So this flower is still pretty small. It's very white, and then it's got distinctive pink stripes on the petals, as you can see here. So there's a general spring beauty variety, and then there's also one called Carolina Spring Beauty. Basically the difference is Carolina grows at higher elevations and has broader leaves. I'm not too much of a botany expert, but I'm going to guess that this is just Spring Beauty. Now, what is this bright red popping out of the landscape? I believe we got some nice old fire pink right here. So fire pink is actually pretty widespread on the eastern half of the U.S., but it is still uncommon, so it's always a joy to me when I see it popping out of the woods. Its brilliant red color helps to attract ruby-throated hummingbirds, which are one of its primary pollinators. I found the zebra swallowtail. Let's see if we can get closer. You can see why it's called a zebra swallowtail. Look at those stripes. So this is one of our native pollinators. Its sole larval food source is the pawpaw tree, which we're going to go look at right now. We have arrived at our pawpaw tree. So before I tell you about this tree, I want to take a moment to look at these flowers up close. So notice this deep maroon color. These are not your garden variety flowers. Now I don't want to pick the flower, but just look inside at that structure. So pawpaw trees have what you would call perfect flowers, which means they have both male and female parts within the same flower, but they are female and male at different times, so they act kind of like imperfect flowers. When the flower starts out as female, it has a pistil with a sticky stigma up at the top that is receptive to pollen. After a few days, the stigma loses its stickiness, it kind of withers away, and then pollen develops in this base right here. So you see all those white granules? That is immature pollen. When it is ready, it will turn brown and dusty, and then the flower is functionally male. So a pawpaw tree cannot self-pollinate to reproduce. Usually in the wild, to reproduce, they will just create additional sprouts off of their root system, and that'll create additional trees. But those trees are genetically similar, and they cannot pollinate each other's flowers. The primary pollinators for these flowers, because they have this yeasty, musty odor, kind of like bread dough, is actually flies and beetles, which, unlike bees, they are not the best of pollinators. It's another reason this plant has some trouble creating fruits. If you are lucky enough to have one of these fruits in your lifetime, they were said to be Thomas Jefferson's favorite. An interesting fact about the leaves of the pawpaw, like other plants in the custard apple family, is that they contain toxic compounds, so few herbivores will feed on them. A notable exception is the butterfly we saw earlier, the zebra swallowtail. Because they eat these leaves, they store the toxic compounds in their bodies, and this provides an additional defense for them, since nothing really wants to eat a poisonous butterfly. So guys, I want to stop here for a minute. 2020 is North Carolina State Park's year of fire, and this is one of the tracts of land we burned at Haw River just last year around this time. So fire has had a very important role in shaping the flower diversity that we see even today. The native people of North America used fire for thousands of years. They used it as a tool to both drive big game and to sort of clear the forest understory for improved visibility and travel. So back then, rock outcroppings, precipitation, and water bodies created natural fire breaks, unlike the trails and service roads we sometimes have to use today to burn tracts of land. But over thousands of years, these frequent low-intensity fires set by both Native Americans and by lightning promoted more open forests with an abundance of grasses, forbs, and shrubs. So naturally, the diversity of wildflowers and other leafy plants on the forest floor went up as well. So I'm here at the park office, and we have the lovely Carolina jessamine, or Carolina jasmine, which has been the official state flower of not our state, but South Carolina since 1924. So jessamine is a native evergreen vine that often climbs trees in our woodlands here in the North Carolina Piedmont. Now, I I bet you guys have this one right in your very own backyard. This here is a dandelion. Now, dandelion is actually an English corruption of the French name for the flower, which is lion's tooth, or dent de lion, which comes from the tooth-like serrations on the leaves here at the bottom of the flower. So dandelions, they are not native to the U.S. They were introduced here by European settlers a long time ago, and now they're a pretty widespread weed throughout the U.S. and Canada. You can find recipes online for dandelion tea or dandelion wines. And I've heard you can also eat them, you can eat the greens of them in salads. I wouldn't advise it, because you shouldn't just go eat stuff that you find in the woods. But another thing, why these aren't actually so bad, is they are a good source of nectar and pollen, an early source. They might not be the choicest nectar and pollen available, but in harsh times, you know, bees gotta take what they can get. So similar to dandelion in that it is a non-native, fast-growing weed, you've got this guy right here, carpet bugle or bugle weed. Just as a general rule in modern times, you don't want to plant a non-native / exotic species in a natural landscape, because whether the species is a plant or an animal, whenever you bring over an exotic species, you're putting it in a place where it does not have any natural predators, diseases, or pests, which gives it sometimes an unfair competitive advantage, and it can crowd out native plants and drastically change the landscape. I'm not blaming you, carpet bugle. I'm just saying plant lovers need to be careful in their choices and plant native whenever possible. As I continue my walk around the building, I come to this, another site, probably from your own very backyard. So this right here is a mature dandelion. Note it's got the same serrated leaves at the base, same hollow stem, and then up top, instead of that bright yellow crown of flowers, we now have this white, puffy, sort of spherical thing. This is what the mature dandelion looks like once it's been pollinated. So I'm gonna pick one of these little seeds and see if I can focus. So each individual seed is attached to this white structure that's kind of like a parachute. Individually, it's called a pappus, P-A-P-P-U-S. Altogether, they are plural, called papae, which is really fun to say. And these little papae are like parachutes, and they kind of help carry the seeds on a wind. Henbit is one of these introduced weeds. It's from Europe. It's pretty hard to eradicate. A single plant can produce anywhere from 200 to 2,000 seeds, and these seeds can remain dormant in the soil for decades, so it's probably here to stay. But it's not all bad news. I've read that box turtles will actually eat the foliage of the plant, and apparently bees will visit the flowers too. Here's a patch of periwinkle. This is one of those invasive introduced species. See how it's kind of like taken over. Pretty flowers. I can see why people like it in their gardens, but it does not belong here in the park. I did not know that sound came out of a squirrel. The more you know. Well, that wraps it up for me. Thank you guys for joining me today on my wildflower hike. And please know that the things that we saw today, the plants and the animals, they are right in your own backyard. So please be responsible, explore locally, and maintain social distancing guidelines. You will be amazed at what you can find. Bye, guys.